What? Hi, I'm Ben,
I'm Jen.
and this is Philosophy Friday.
So it is.
You guys are really missing out now, not being able to see Jenn dance during the intro music.
Yeah.
But in any case, actually, let's do this. So we can
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, great.
Well,
Okay.
It was perfect.
There we go. All right. I appreciate that, Silver Harlow.
What up, J. Andrew? You can burn your fingernails on basically anything.
Yeah, J. Andrew World, our very talented graphic designer, burned his fingers on a grilled cheese. Am I getting that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
So
My mom asked me, "Do you know this J. Andrew person?" And I was like, "Yeah. I mean, yeah, through Facebook and through Ben, but yeah, I do."
Fair enough. So today we are talking about philosophy of religion, which is the area of philosophy
that has to do with religion.
Well, there we go. I guess that's all the explanation we need of that. We're arguing about whether or not some sort of God exists, and if so, how can you explain the existence of undeserved suffering? And
no, we're not doing that yet.
Well, bear with me.
Oh.
And if not, is everything meaningless? And and what are the arguments for and against, and all that good stuff? And obviously, that's too much to do in an hour. So we're doing it as a two-parter, so 2 hours. That should be more than enough, to cover all that.
One would hope.
Decisively settle all of those issues for all time.
Exactly. As we do every week.
Yeah, I have not watched it, but I was psyched to see that they were on it. So our good friends of the show, Jason Miles and Pascal Robert, who've both been on this show multiple.
I know Jason. We're Facebook friends.
They've both been on this show multiple times. They've been on this Revolution a couple times. They're great. Big fan of both of those guys, and this has been a very good week for them. Glenn Greenwald shouted out their show earlier this week on Twitter, and both of them just appeared on the Majority Report today. So, been really happy to see that. But
good job.
Yes, exactly. But in any case, speaking of Glenn Greenwald, he just interviewed me for his Substack. So that should be coming out
3 hours ago.
That should be coming out sometime next week. I'm sure
Toga.
Everybody will have reasonable and measured reactions to that, because that is how the internet works. But in any case, it was
nuanced.
Exactly, nuanced. But no, it was a good discussion. Looking forward to seeing that come out. Yeah, okay. I think I'm on team Beret, and Jen's on team Toga.
How can you not be on team Toga? That's the original.
That is the original.
The OG philosopher.
That is the original. As the Beret is more like the
OG philosopher attire.
De Bouvier and the cafe in Paris in the 1940s or something. But,
255. I'm sitting right here.
Yeah, you could just ask. You could just ask Jen. I'll bet she'd tell you. So, but yeah, Um, yeah, you have to. I mean, that's not. I actually, what I would have told Sam had me ask, he asked me in advance, is if you're going to interview Pascal, like you just have to. It's like interviewing Zizek. You have to just understand in advance that it's not really going to be an interview in the sense that you go back and forth and all, you say something, they say something, you just kind of set them off and they go, you give them a little cue and they do their thing and you kind of sit back and watch it. But it's.
This is what conversations with you are like a lot of the time. Conversations.
Well, let's put it this way. Both of those guys much more so. So.
I tee you up and there you go.
Yeah. I don't know. They just rock a lot more. That seems like an adequate explanation.
Well, why isn't your kid making its own grilled? It's his or her own grilled cheese. Come on.
It does sound like a very nice grilled cheese, though. So,
I'm very basic about my grilled cheeses. I want, white bread, Kraft singles,
well,
possibly a tomato.
So what did the Greeks wear before they were colonized by the Romans? That's what I want to know. But in any case, so yeah, well, us too. That's why we do Philosophy Friday.
So what do you mean us two?
The channel, the channel.
Yeah, but okay. I do not like political videos at all. So.
Yes. But us, the channel, the collective us.
The collective us.
Yes, like a mixture.
The royal we.
A mixture, yes. It's Jeremy Selman,
naturally.
Host of the very good Giving the Mic to the Wrong Person podcast, says who wore cargo shorts naturally. So that sounds right. I'm just going to believe that now. So yeah, philosophy of religion. So of course, because we're really talking about in context, we're not going to start. We've only got the two parts. We're not going to start talking about Buddhism and all of that. Really, what we're talking about is Western philosophy of religion, which is primarily comes out of the intersection of Greek philosophy as produced by people who may or may not have worn togas. We're still waiting final word on that.
Loincloths.
Was Aristotle wearing a loincloth at Lyceum?
Absolutely.
See, that's not at all what's portrayed in that Raphael, school of Athens painting. Yeah, Silver Harlow says a toga, or at least a proper toga, not the fraternity version, requires a servant to put on correctly, which is why it was assigned to be in the upper class. Okay, well, all these guys were in the upper class. Trust me, in ancient Greece, if you weren't in the upper class, there's no way you had time to think about philosophy. You were probably too busy, working all day and not having your basic material needs met and living in slavery. Yeah, fair enough.
Knives make me nervous too, to be honest.
Yeah, fancy ramen noodles or just like the packaged ramen noodles? That's what I want to know.
I always ask Ben to cut my bagels in half because I don't want anything to do with that.
Well, unless we're here because we have the bagel guillotine here.
Right, but if we don't, I always ask Ben to do that. And Ben's dad makes bread. These big loaves of delicious bread, and I will not cut the slice from the bread myself with the giant bread knife, which looks terrifying. So, I feel you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So yeah, Western philosophy of religion, which comes out of roughly the encounter between, that between Greek philosophy is preserved and whatever later, and primarily Christianity, although also a significant chunk is Islam. I mean, that's a huge part of the story, and a little chunk is Judaism with people like Maimonides, but and then later during the Enlightenment, people like David Hume saying, "Nah, you guys are all wrong," and then people. This is like the 2-sentence version of thousands of years of intellectual history,
which is the best version, honestly.
And other people then say, no, they were actually right, and the back and forth between those latter groups of people. If there's any actual historians of philosophy listening to this are in pain because that was so simplified. But in any case, okay, that that's respectable. So
it's more respectable than anything I'm gonna cook.
Not entirely true, but okay. So yeah, out of the two of us, I am the one who does more fancy cooking. It is true.
You enjoy cooking.
Right.
Cooking makes me want to stab myself in the eardrum.
But you never do. So that's good.
No, there was that time I threw an egg, though.
Okay, but that's a lot better than stabbing yourself in the eardrum.
Yeah.
So roughly, the kind of philosophy of religion we're talking about is very much focused on whether God, in the sense of God that you get in the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, those religions, that whether that being exists, the one who's supposed to be all powerful and all good and all knowing. Sometimes philosophers, being dorks, will say all PKG for all powerful, all knowing, all good. The $5 words for all of those things are omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent.
Say those again.
Well, actually, let me do it in order for all PKG. Omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent.
Ooh.
So, omnipotent meaning all powerful, omniscient meaning all knowing, and
omnibenevolent being all good.
Right. Yeah, right. That.
So what you're getting here is basically what you would be getting in an intro to philosophy or intro to religion class. They're not going to start talking to you about Buddhism and the like.
Yeah, depending on who's teaching, but yeah, pretty much.
But intro.
Yeah.
An introductory level. This is, maybe at the end when you start getting into the more,
sure,
optional for the instructor kind of thing. But a lot of time at the beginning, you really just have to cover the same stuff.
Yeah, because this very narrow thing, right? Whether that God exists, and if so, how you explain the obvious problem about evil. If people believed in an omnimalevolent God, there would be a problem of good. How do you explain the existence of sunshine and puppies? But because theists, as we use that term, are people who believe in the omnibenevolent one. You've got the problem of evil, and all these arguments have been come up with. And there are all these counter arguments and objections to the objections. So as narrow as that topic is, right? Basically, whether this one specific belief is right, this is also something there has been an immense amount of philosophical work done over the centuries, and you have all these really interesting, well-developed arguments about this, and you can, and so that's why we're not about to start talking about Taoism or something, because
also because I know nothing about it. So that wouldn't be very exciting.
Yeah, I took one class on religions of East Asia in 1999. So
I took no classes on religions of East Asia.
Right. So I could try to remember what was covered there, but
you have fun with that.
I can, but I am pretty up on what we think of typically in philosophy departments as philosophy of religion, which is again pretty much Western philosophy of religion. 255 AD says the standard ancient Greek outfit. So in ancient Greece, pre-Roman, so considerably predating this dude's time, 255 AD.
He only talks to you.
Okay. Direct questions at Jenn, the 255 AD. You're being weird. I believe the standard ancient Greek outfit for men was a short-sleeved tunic / dress-like garment called a chiton.
So does this mean that when you go
Chiton?
to teach your classes that you will be wearing a tunic dress? I wear dresses to teach my classes, so I'm
Sure.
I'm on trend there.
We got a Taoism joke in the comment. It's okay if you skip Taoism. The Tao that can be philosophized about is not the true Tao. So there you go. Not until just now, but yeah,
And you have time for this one.
figure it out. So
We'll have a marital conversation about this later.
Jenn did just put her finger on the biggest problem, but in principle, yes, I would consider doing that. If I could create time in which to do it, that sounds fun.
You would literally have to create time to have the time to do it.
Yeah. Please tell me that's on YouTube. We'll do it on Sunday. So yeah, Copleston is this Jesuit priest or monk who wrote this immense, many volume history of philosophy, starting with the ancient Greeks, big, thick, volumes. And A.J. Ayer was a 20th century British philosopher. He was a logical positivist. And probably the other most significant thing about him is there's a famous story about him standing up to Mike Tyson at a party.
Is this that guy?
Yeah, that's that guy.
Oh.
So he was at like a Hollywood party somehow, and Ayer at this point was like 1 million years old. This, and he and there was an actress. I am blanking on which actress, but who was being harassed by Mike Tyson, and Ayer goes up and says, you should leave the lady alone. And Tyson says, "Man, do you know who I am? I am the heavyweight champion of the world." And Ayer says, "Well, I am the Bertrand Russell Professor of Logic at Cambridge University, so we are both preeminent in our fields. Let's have a reasonable discussion about this." And then I guess Tyson was so nonplussed by that, he just wandered off. But that's the...
Just to be clear, I do know A.J. Ayer for more than just that.
Yeah. I know you've taught one of his articles about
more than one.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, philosophy of religion.
Yeah, philosophy of religion. So yes, I do not know if that is available on YouTube. Send it to me, and we'll cover it some Sunday. But yeah, so there are basically 3 arguments that philosophers who are theists, in other words, philosophers who believe in the existence of God, have. Like, there aren't just these 3, but these are the 3 main ones. Historically, they all have fancy names. There is the...
we like the fancy.
Yes. The teleological argument, the cosmological argument, and the ontological argument.
What were those again?
The cosmological... Sorry, I did those. I messed up the order. The teleological argument, the cosmological argument, and the ontological argument. So the teleological argument, also known as the argument for design, is the argument that the world, different versions of this argument, you can focus on like the natural world.
This is the William Paley argument, the watchmaker.
Yeah. Or like a more cosmic level, but the world, the universe, whatever, is too amazing and wonderful and well-designed and harmonious and blah, blah, blah to come about just by chance. There must have been a designer.
So the William Paley thing is, he says if you were walking in a field and you came across a rock and you said, "How did this rock come to be here?" And somebody told you, "Oh, that rock has always been there." You'd be like, "Yeah, all right." But if you came across a watch and you said, "How did this watch get here?" and somebody told you, "Oh, it's always been here," you would be like, "Yeah, I don't think so."
Yeah, or you wouldn't believe if somebody said, "Okay, here's my view about how the watch got here. Over the course of thousands of years of the wind and the waves eroding the rock, It just so happened to shape it into the exact form of a watch that actually works and actually tells time. Then you think, yeah, probably not, right?
So just as the watch is very complex, it has a purpose. All its parts work together to achieve the purpose, and we can, look in it and see the parts and see how they work and all that. That implies that there must have been a watchmaker. So the existence of the Earth and how it is implies that there must be an Earthmaker.
Yeah,
a creator.
Right. So yeah, I think the fine tuning argument is I think that's a version of the teleological argument. Seems like.
I don't think it is actually.
Okay, because it seems like that it's essentially the same move. You're saying like, how could it's so unlikely that this would have come about without somebody setting it up this way. Although I guess usually when people think about the teleological argument,
because teleo means ends, purpose. So, and I'm not sure that this really addresses that. But yeah, it's that everything is just so finely, if one molecule of whatever was different, that we wouldn't have life, and how likely is it that would have come to pass without a creator?
Yeah. Which again,
so it is very similar. I just don't think it has that same, the watch exists it has a purpose, and it acts so as to achieve that purpose. So I think that's where it differs.
Although often when people are presenting the fine-tuning argument, they'll say that, this is so unlikely, but like part of what they're saying is like, if these physical constants had been just a little bit different, we couldn't exist. So therefore they must have been set up this way by a being who wanted us to exist. So there is some implication of purpose there, I think. But yeah, whatever. Whether
if I was teaching them both in a class, I would. Well, actually, I have.
Yeah, I think that's probably
separate.
I think that's probably more typical. I just think it seems like the basic idea is the same. That you're saying that like classic versions of the teleological argument, like Paley with the watch, are focused on the natural world here on Earth, but and this is focused on the big picture of the cosmos, as a whole, and the sort of basic facts about the physical universe. But the move is the same. Like, here is the universe as it is. Would it be? Do you think it's maybe impossible, or at least extremely unlikely, that things would have come about that way without some conscious intention or purpose in setting it up that way? Therefore, we can infer back to that designer. So I think there are a few different ways that you can object to this argument. And of course, it's gotten a lot easier since 1859, when Darwin came out with The Origin of the Species, since that gives a naturalistic, like a non-supernatural explanation for some of the things that people like Paley were talking about, at least, right? Like, how is it that you get this perfect fit, like the parts in a watch, between organisms and environment? Why is it that this animal has eyes that actually work to see out of, and ears that it can hear out of, and other plants and animals that it can eat, and blah 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 blah, right? It was all clearly set up for this purpose, whereas the Darwinist explanation could say, okay, as long as you've got random mutation, just natural selection under certain environmental pressures over the course of a long time can explain a lot of this stuff. Although obviously there are versions of it that's not going to, certainly the fine tuning, if you consider that a version of it, or at least a variation of the same idea, that's certainly not going to help with that. But I think there are some bigger problems, like thinking about probability. Yes, there we go. So
it wasn't just the tagging, though. It was, how this person asked you if I was religious, and then didn't ask me.
Sure, it's okay.
It's okay.
So, so certainly with fine tuning, there's a So I know that one like move that's sometimes made there is to talk about how the universe is really a multiverse, and so there are like different, there are different versions that all exist that have these constants that way or this way or they don't, and that's supposed to handle this. But if about 30 more seconds of talking about this, and it's going to become painfully obvious that I need to prepare a lot more to say anything well informed or,
That's why I'm letting you do it. Talking.
or informative about it. But even aside from that, there is like a purely conceptual problem about this, just in terms of probability. So, like in regular deductive logic, there's something called modus tollens, which is.
Are you asking me?
I am it.
If P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P.
Right. So.
I'm a great logic teacher. You can tell that from just then.
Yeah. Well. Also tell that because it says so at the beginning of that book.
If it is raining, then I will carry an umbrella. I'm not carrying an umbrella, therefore it is not raining.
Yeah, exactly. So if somebody says if there were really aliens visiting the Earth, there would be clearer pictures that aren't just fuzzy blobs. There are not clearer pictures, so they're not, right? I mean, that's a good argument or not depends on what you think the premise is, but the conclusion follows. That's modus tollens. Thank you.
Talking to me. Thank you.
So, but the problem is you can't really do modus tollens with probabilities. You can't really say if A is true, if A happened, it's very unlikely that B happened. B did happen, therefore it's very unlikely that A happened. And to see why you can't really do that, think about just dealing cards. Like if you have a standard deck of 52 cards, and you shuffle them, and then you deal one out, and it's whatever. Say the name of the card. What's a card?
Seven of Hearts.
Seven of Hearts. And it would clearly not be a reasonable inference to say, aha, I don't think you randomly shuffled it. I think there was cheating, because if it was randomly shuffled, there would only be a 1 out of 52 chance that a Seven of Hearts would be dealt. Whereas if you rigged this to make sure that there was a Seven of Hearts, there would be a almost 100% chance. I guess you could mess it up. And that's clearly not a reasonable inference. Right?
It is not.
So now, what makes this a little tricky is if you think about, like, there's a movie, it was a play, but there was a movie called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, where at the beginning of the movie, somebody's flipping a coin and it comes up heads. I might be messing it up, it was tails, but whatever. It comes up the same thing like 200 times in a row. And in that situation, yeah, it's pretty reasonable to start wondering, it's like, but was that really a fair coin? And explaining, what the difference is between those, can be tricky. Although you could also say with the universe, we're talking about a one, at least assuming that we don't live in a multiverse, we're talking about a one instance thing. And this, so it's not like we've started over again from the Big Bang, 50 times and seen how often we get life, it's just the one test.
Again.
That's a fun idea. That's worth thinking about. Oh, yeah.
Oh, so I'm involved in this too.
You should be. Philosophy, you should be. So, yeah, it's worth thinking about. So that's one problem. One objection you could make to it, and another objection, our friend Tom from Yacubia.
From what?
Yacubia.
What is that?
It's a joke. It's the the Nation of Islam. They believe that Yaqub was the evil scientist who invented white people. So that's his handle is Tom from Yakubia.
Okay.
But I don't know if they still believe that. I know they did at one time. Or Yaqub. Anyway. We have an important question if you want to answer that.
Nothing.
Okay.
Just random.
There's no design.
No.
All right. Yeah. Okay, it was heads. It kept coming up heads for several scenes. It became a callback joke in later parts of the play. Oh, you meant the movie, which messed up the end of the play. Okay. I don't remember if it came up again in the movie or not. There's Simpsons. This reminds me of. So, we'll watch that. So
there's already one that came up at dinner. I don't even remember what it was. There's a Simpsons for that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So apparently they do still believe that. I liked. Was it last year when Louis Farrakhan said, and he was doing it in front of his. Trying to remember what they're called. Like a certain style of preaching. There'll be the guys who stand like behind the lectern. Of, that's right. Those guys. I don't know what they're actually called. What's in my head is reply guys, but I know that's not it. Anyway.
Call and response.
Yeah, but I mean, like, what are the actual the responders called? Like the guys who like stand up there by the podium, like that's right.
I guess call and response is the whole.
Yeah, it's the whole business. Yeah. So. He was in front of some of those guys, and he was taking credit for the COVID spike in Florida, which he said that he'd asked God to do that, to punish Florida because the Miami Cubans interfering with good relations between the U.S. and Cuba. And there was said something about Jews in there, and it was like a very, it was like, oh, all right, well, that's on the. Assuming theism, that is quite an assumption that God is taking instruction from Louis Farrakhan on these things. But in any case, yeah. So yeah, a point Ayer made in the debate was a lot of these arguments really just reflect properties or limitations of language. They don't really map onto the real world. What do you think? I think I'd have to know which examples he was thinking of.
I think this explains a lot of philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that there's nothing in philosophy that this insight holds of. I mean, I'm sure.
I think it holds for just about everything, to be honest.
I wouldn't go that far, but I think there is. I remember seeing several years ago, our friend Kyle posted that meme with Fry from Futurama looking confused, and it was not sure if dispute about language or argument about underlying reality.
Mm-hmm.
So
philosophy is a game of definitions.
Big parts of it are, yeah. So yes, that was a classic. But it's an episode of South Park where they.
Yeah, I know. You'll show it to me later. I've been down this road.
All right. So you could also point out. I was going to say earlier that there's a lot of the evidence that it doesn't obviously that you could really question how it fits with this, right? So like. Humans have vestigial tails. They don't serve any good purpose whatsoever for us. And you'd say, okay, well, if we're all designed by like the perfect engineer, what's the point of that? And you could say, oh, I mean, God's purposes are mysterious. My feeble human brain, can't comprehend the great plan and all that business. But then I think that kind of undermines if you do make that move, that undermines the teleological argument, Yeah, that was Tom from Yakubi. That's how we got off on that. Tom from Yakubi was pointing out about the vestigial parts in various pieces of nature, things that like were maybe left over from previous evolutionary forms and everything, as a disanalogy between like organisms and watches. And yeah, and the problem is if you go the sort of end of the Book of Job, voice from the whirlwind, how can your stupid monkey brain comprehend all of this, business? Then you have a problem. Then that really undermines the teleological argument themselves, because the whole idea of the teleological argument is that we know enough about, like, if you're going to say this is how the way the world is how a infinite perfect creator would have made it, then the question is, okay, well, do you know how an infinite perfect creator would have made it? If so, then sure, you can say that. But then you also have the problem about the vestigial tales and all that business. Whereas if not, if you have no idea how a being like that would have made things, then how can the way things are be evidence for? Anyway, I think you get what I'm saying. I'm gonna let you talk for a
while. Well, if you just want to address for a second the, how can we understand with our stupid monkey brains? If you have the standard conception of God, then God is clearly something that we cannot understand with our stupid monkey brains, because, it would be like asking a child to understand what was going on in the mind of the adult, and that would clearly be impossible. So if you held this conception of God, then asking a human to understand what was going on, that would also be impossible as well. So I don't, how that fits in with the teleological argument, that's one thing. But then on the other hand,
the thing itself,
I know people use that as that's just a cop-out answer. But it seems like that would just be obviously true, that we wouldn't be able to understand the workings of God.
Yeah, right. So there's a view, contemporary philosophy of religion, called skeptical theism, which is basically theists who say that, like, that. I guess this gets us more into the problem of evil, which we'll talk about next week. But basically that what Jenn said is like kind of their solution to that. And then again, there's a question about how, if you are going to say that, whether you can still use the argument from design. Like, in other words, if the way the world is can't be evidence against the existence of God, because who are we to know how or what, or there's a lot.
And maybe God can, if then God should be able to. Well, who's to say that God can't explain it to us, and he just isn't?
Yeah. I feel like I missed something, but I'm gonna thrust onward, in any case.
Thrust onward, then.
Yeah. So okay, yeah. So the objection is, if the way the world is can't be evidence against God because of skeptical theism, can the way the world is be evidence for God, or do you kind of have to pick one or the other? Now, if you are a theist, full disclosure, I am not. But if you are, and you want to think, and you say, okay, well, teleological argument might have this problem. At least if you pick the skeptic theist, don't worry about it, because we've still got two major arguments left: the cosmological and the ontological argument. So, the argument says that. Is also known as the first cause argument, that if you think about the chain of cause and effect leading up to all the things that exist today, this this mouse was made in a probably in a factory in China somewhere, and the workers at that factory were made by their parents in the usual way, and the parents same deal, and the factory itself was built by another group of workers.
China.
Oh, good guess. And etc. Right. So you've got all these chains of cause and effect leading up to the existence of all the objects that exist in the world today, and the Earth, the planet, there's a chain of cause and effect leading up to the planet being formed, etc. And so you say, well, this chain of cause and effect, it just can't go back forever. It must terminate at a first thing.
An uncaused cause.
Right. Whatever the first one is, by definition, will be uncaused, or it wouldn't be the first. Its cause might be the first, but it wouldn't be. So this is...
Then it would be uncaused.
Right. Exactly. This is like the... So the teleological and cosmological, right, the argument from design and the first cause argument are both arguments for the existence of God, or I guess the fine-tuning is the third, if you consider that a separate argument. Arguments for the existence of God based in some way on the existence of creation, having to be explained by the existence of a creator, but they're slightly different kinds of arguments from the existence of the world to the existence of a creator. The teleological argument is an argument from the specific kind of world that exists, right? So I'll sort of think of like the teleological argument as like, it's a super cheesy example, but I'm going to do it anyway.
I love it when you get cheesy.
I don't know. I was thinking, the late Quentin Smith, in his book with Nathan Oakland, Time, Change, and Freedom, this is exactly the kind of example where he would have used in there, so that's probably what's influencing me there. But you imagine like two friends are climbing up to the top of the mountain, and on the hike they're arguing about the existence of God, and one's a theist and one's an atheist. They're up at the top of the mountain, and like the sun's rising over the mountain and illuminates this beautiful landscape. So
they're out hiking in the dark?
Yeah. Sure.
Why?
Yeah. That's what. Oh, you have the best philosophy talks during mountain,
on the mountain in the dark.
On the mountain in the dark. True story, by the way. I can personally attest to the dangers of mountain climbing.
Oh yeah, that was when you fell off the cliff.
Yeah, I was when I was teaching at the University of Ulsan in South Korea. Within the first month I was there,
he fell off the cliff.
I ended up going mountain climbing with one of the Korean professors there and some students, and probably after a little bit too much soju, one of the professor had said something about how he climbs up the mountain like once a month. I was like, oh, that sounds fun. Next time you do it, I'll come along. And then for better or for worse, I stuck to it, and did so. And even though the Korean professor is much older than me, he was in vastly better shape, and the undergraduates were all like in the South Korean version of the ROTC, so I was definitely the odd man out in this expedition. And we got up to, so we climbed up there. Most of it was okay. It was just kind of a nice hike. By the time we got up to the last mile up, that was pretty brutal, at least for me. And then got up to the top and had some snacks and soju and whatnot, and started and then very badly planned walking back as the the sun was going down as we're doing this. We're halfway down the mountain. It got too dark to see.
Hiking in the dark, dangerous.
To see the path clearly, and there was one flashlight to go around in the group, and that was clearly not enough. And I tripped, and I actually did fall off a cliff. There was this is the kind of Hollywood nonsense that doesn't sound like it would work in real life, but there was a root, a tree. I managed to grab onto it, and that kept me, kept me on the edge of the cliff for long enough that they could pull me up. So they were doing that foolish thing. They get up to the top of the mountain, the sun's rising over the beautiful landscape, and the one who's a theist gestures at it to the one who's an atheist, says, look, you really think all of this, came about by chance? There's nothing that made all this, that's the teleological argument. But the cosmological argument would, apply just as well or just as badly, in if all that existed were two rocks swirling around by a black hole or something. Yeah, like that. That's how rocks do. the cosmological argument would make just as much or just as little sense in that world as in our world, because it's not how could this specific world exist without a designer. It's how could any world at all exist without a designer. How could there be something rather than nothing? Which I remember one of his lectures, G.A. Cohen makes a little joke about it, about this sort of, he was like, oh, how could there be something rather than nothing? It was like the best response to this. He does this like really stereotypical, like elderly Jewish guy voice. It's like, if there were nothing, you'd still complain. So, right. Sometimes, if they were all existing, whatever, go with it.
So we tell our students all the time, just go with it.
Exactly. Don't worry about how the people got in the trolley tracks. Just go with it.
Don't worry about why the dude is asking you to hide him in your house.
Right. So the simplest version of the cosmological argument, the first cause argument, says everything has a cause, therefore the universe as a whole must have a cause. So there's a first cause. This God is the first cause. And
one thing you might say to that is, well, why can't there just be an infinite regress?
Sure.
Why not?
Why not?
I mean, the whole point of this argument.
Why not, though?
And the whole point of this argument is that you can't have an infinite regress. It has to stop somewhere, which is the first cause. But you might say, well, why are you assuming that in the first place?
Yeah. So one thing, like the usual objection to the form I just gave, this sort of super simple form of the cosmological argument, is that the first premise, as stated, actually contradicts the conclusion. Because if everything has a cause, there can't be a first cause. Because that first cause, as we discussed earlier, it would be an uncaused cause. And if everything has a cause, there can't be an uncaused cause. So that's one challenge for if you want to make a version of this work, you need some principled way of limiting what you have to basically have something to fill in the blank of everything that blank has a cause, and you need something to put in the blank that isn't obviously just like special pleading, like everything that isn't God has a cause, because that just seems like cheating. You're just trying to get the result that you want, but also is narrow enough that you're not going to have this self-refutation problem, that the first cause is going to need a cause. So that's one problem. In fact, as stated, so Jenn was just saying that so you could ask, why can't the chain of causes just kind of go back forever? And I think, honestly, when I try to really look in at the, close my eyes and examine my intuitions on this point, for whatever good that does. I don't know why our intuitions would particularly guide us effectively in this area. If we're doing moral philosophy, then maybe you could say, okay, we're trying to figure out what we care about, what moral values we care about. But if we're trying to figure out what's objectively true about the physical universe, it's less clear that our dumb monkey brains would be of what sounds right to us is the universe isn't necessarily under any obligation to line up with what sounds right to us. But then also, if I do try to examine my intuitions about this, if I try to think about the chain of causes going back forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and never stopping, that sounds wrong. That sounds like that shouldn't be possible. Mm-hmm. I can't explain exactly why not, but it clashes in a very unpleasant way against my.
It is very difficult to imagine that, and on the other hand, it's very difficult to imagine a God who's just always been there. So either way, there's something going on that's very counterintuitive.
Exactly. I mean, I think about the chain of cause going back forever, that clangs unpleasantly against my intuitions. Mm-hmm. If I think about there being a first thing, then that also clangs unpleasantly against my intuitions. Well, wait a second. What do you mean first thing? What's before the first thing? There is no before the first thing. It's wait, what?
First thing has just always been there.
Yeah.
But, there are things that exist that are beyond our intuitions. Once we get up into the large numbers,
Right.
we can't. These are not things that we can conceptualize, and this, infinity is not something we can conceptualize. So just because it's counterintuitive to think that either there is an infinite regress or that there is a being that's just always been there, that doesn't mean it's not possible. Just because we can't really grasp it with our monkey brain.
Yeah, or subatomic particles seem to work in ways that the monkey brains just are hopeless with. Even probability. Like we're
not good at it.
There's a lot of probability that the old monkey brain is not good at,
There's a lot of things that the old monkey brain is not good at doing.
So like the idea of a first thing, or like if you try to like really think, okay, does time itself begin to exist? That the idea of time beginning to exist.
Like, what does that even mean?
Sounds wrong. Shout out, because we're not going to do 10 minutes right now about what time beginning to exist could mean, but that Quentin book by my late grad school professor Quentin Smith, and co-written with Nathan Oaklander, Time Changing Freedom. The first part of that gets into this, and there's an interesting discussion about it there. There's also, I think, the only joke in the Confessions of St. Augustine is about this topic. He says
he was hilarious.
Yeah, not somebody who's generally known for being hilarious, but he does throw in one joke. It's about this. That, although I also find the thing in there pretty funny, where he says that back when he was, drinking and gambling and whatnot, he would pray, "God save me," but not yet. So
we are going to do time on a future episode.
We are. But yeah, he said people had asked him what God did before he created time, and his response was he occupied himself creating hells for people who asked that question. So in any case, so again, yeah, is it counterintuitive to think the chain of cause go back forever? Yeah, it is. Is it counterintuitive to think it doesn't go back forever? Also, yes. There's no good answer here. And certainly, if God exists, lots of counterintuitive stuff about that. So, but in probably, so the two ways, somebody mentioned Dr. Pangloss earlier from Candide, who's a parody of the philosopher Gottfried Leibniz, who is,
say that again.
Gottfried Leibniz, who is along with Isaac Newton, the two of them are the co-discoverers of calculus. So if you ever had to take calculus class, you might have various feelings about that. But
I don't.
So.
But then I never took a calculus class.
Yeah, right. So that's the third option. You could have a loop of causes, like a la the plot of the first Terminator movie. Don't know anybody actually argues for that one, but that is, like, if we're just mapping out the possibilities, that is one of them. So yeah, Leibniz has a version of the cosmological argument where he says, look, maybe the chain of causes does go back forever, but you still need something to explain why the chain itself exists. But then, I don't know. Actually, I'd be interested to hear what you think. Like, I've always found that really unsatisfying. It's like, wait a second, if your demand for causes is so great that even if every single link in the chain has been explained, that's not good enough for you. You want an explanation for the existence of the whole chain. Then how is the demand for causes strong enough for that, but not strong enough to demand an explanation for, like, the cause for the existence of God? Yeah. Okay.
I don't really have thoughts on that.
Okay, fair enough.
To be honest,
there's also a version of it that is. I don't think it's that they require a break in the normal logical argument. There's nothing logically wrong with any of these. They're just weird to think about, right? They just sound wrong to us. That doesn't mean that they're logically inconsistent. They just sound funny. There's another way of that sounds like a Philip K. Dick thought to me. So I love Philip K. Dick, I should say. I think I made Jenn read like a couple of those books when we first got together. They're great. Terrible. They're outstanding. you know, that's a book club we're not doing. So,
Or you can.
yeah. No, there's no evidence for that. The point was just that if you're considering the possibilities in the abstract, right, like that, just what's the logical space of all the possibilities, that would be one of them.
If you want to understand time, what you should do is you should watch the movie Primer, and then it will all be clear.
I'd be terrified of anybody who's less confused because they saw Primer.
Oh, Valis, that was one of them. It was so bad.
Yeah, I love Valis.
So bad.
One of my favorite books. So, yeah, well, I'm sure Mortimer Adler was getting it from Leibniz. But in any case, so, yeah, and by the way, it's easy to think that this question of whether the chain of cause goes back forever or not is solved by physics, Big Bang cosmology. It's not. It's because
Primer.
Yes, Primer. That's a
Primer.
Yes, it is a very confusing movie. It's a good movie. It's fun, but it's very.
What, you didn't
confusing.
get it?
All right. Well, you'll explain it to me after we're done with the strip.
How embarrassing! He has actually introduced me to a lot of things that I like.
Yeah, I
like him best. But yeah.
I think I've given you a fair number of books. I think
For sure.
that you've liked.
Yeah.
So quite a few of them actually early on.
Yeah, and I introduced you to James the Connoisseur Cat. So
Valis wasn't a hit, but I think
it was not.
But I think
at all a hit.
But I think it came after like 10 or 15 books that were hits.
Yeah, that's very true.
Like,
there were a lot of
like
hits.
Wonder Boys. I guess
Yeah, that was definitely a
first
hit.
book I pushed on you, and you definitely liked that. Let's not even get into that. So many things. So trust me, the traffic goes in both directions there.
Yeah.
And yeah, first thing that she ever got me to read was James the Connoisseur Cat. So there you go.
And then I gave him was it the second book that I gave you to read was called Throat Sprockets?
Yeah.
And we were just talking about that the other day, that probably if I had handed that over to anybody else, they would be like, this chick's a little weird. And exactly. So we're meant to be, if anybody's heard of Throat Sprockets, let us know.
Yeah.
I would be shocked.
So I'm sure a few people have. Brad Easton Ellis blurbed it. It's not like it's a book that they only printed 3 copies of or something.
It's about, that too. The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. Yep.
Yeah, I gave that
Absolutely.
to you. Right? Yep. Oh, I love that book. William Lane Craig says everything that begins to exist has a cause. So the idea, which is actually I think a pretty good way of like filling in the blank, like as far as like initial plausibility goes, because on the one hand, it's presumably not going to include God because you don't think God begins to exist. There's a time when there's no God, when there's God.
Seems very question begging.
So this is interesting as the resident infidel. Actually, I maybe have a better evaluation of this than Jenn does, ironically enough. But yeah, it's like, but I think like what you can say for this as an initial move is like, okay, it does seem fair that nothing can begin to exist. Like that sounds intuitively kind of right. Like the number 3 doesn't seem like the kind of thing that needs to have a cause. You say what caused the number 3? That sounds a little funny. But presumably, if you think that numbers have a separate existence besides like human conception of them, you don't think that once there was no 3 and now there is a 3. Like you think, before just we used to go from 2 to 4, and then then there was 3.
When humans came along, then we invented 3.
Right. So the number 3 doesn't seem like the kind of thing that needs a cause. But if I'm, have a glass of beer and its other hand is empty, and then another glass of beer just materializes into existence in my other hand,
I'm leaving.
Then
if that happens, I am leaving.
Well, if that happened, I
The
think,
house, the town.
and then you said like, oh, why did that happen, right? Like what caused that second class to exist? I said, I don't know. Sometimes things just happen without causes. Sometimes things just come into existence without causes. You say, I don't think so, man. That doesn't sound right. So the idea that nothing can begin to exist without a cause does sound fairly plausible to me, and that you could see how you could think that doesn't include God. But the problem is, if you're going to say, well, okay, nothing can begin to exist without a cause, the universe as a whole began to exist, therefore the universe as a whole needs cause, is what we were just saying about how you might think that second premise, that the universe as a whole begins to exist, that you can get that just from physics, from Big Bang cosmology. But as somebody pointed out in the chat who went flying by a while ago, that's not really the case, because saying that the universe as it exists now can be traced back to the zero-dimensional space-time point, the Big Bang, leaves open the question of what, if anything, is before that. And you have different cosmological models where our bang is the first bang and there's nothing before that, which is what Craig, I guess, would assume. Or you have others where there's like a cycle of big bangs and big crunches. There's the Big Bang, the universe expands out for several gazillion years, imprecise estimate, and then for another several gazillion years it contracts back on itself in a big crunch, and then that's the Big Bang of the next version of the universe. So it could still be the chain of causes that goes back forever, or you could have some multiverse thing that, as we established earlier, I don't really understand. So there are lots of options, and it's really hard to settle this debate, like just on a physics level, because you can have like mathematically intricate models that go along with one or the other, but it's kind of hard to test, right? Mm-hmm. Like what's the experiment look like that settles this? Yeah, I vaguely know who Matt Dillahunty is. I've seen his name on debates, but I haven't actually watched any debates. I should watch one sometime. But the problem, so what Craig does in order to support this idea that the universe can't have just existed forever, is he brings up these, and he's getting this from like medieval, like Craig is like a contemporary Christian philosopher, but he's getting this from medieval Islamic thinkers. So it's the Kalam cosmological argument, and they would argue that the universe must have a beginning. It can't have existed forever because there's so-called paradoxes of actual infinity. So if you have a infinite library, to make it easier to imagine, let's say every other book in the infinite library has a red cover, every other book has a black cover. So it goes red book, black book, red book, black book into infinity. You check a book out of the infinite library. How many books are left?
Infinite.
Yeah, there's still infinite books. And it's, we're not going to do any math here.
No, sorry, Kathy.
But in a class with a chalkboard, if I was doing this, I'd go through Jorg Cantor's, one of his diagonal proof of that not all infinities are the same size, but even with that, it's even an infinity of the same size, because the properties of infinite numbers are really weird, and they don't sit well with the monkey brain. Okay, so he says that's not how reality should work. You can check out a book and you have just as many books as you had before. Or there's a thought experiment, Hilbert's Hotel. There's a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, an infinite number of guests. Every room has a guest in it. But then a new wannabe guest comes in. Somebody comes out of the cold and to talk to the night manager at the Infinite Hotel. Says, do you have any vacancies? He says, no, but it's okay. I got you. Here's how we'll do it. We'll move you into room 1. We'll move the guy who was in room 1 to room 2. Move the guy who was in room 2 into room 3. 3 into 4, 4 into 5, 5 into 6. 700 trillion into 700 trillion and 1, 700 trillion and 2, over 700 trillion and 3, etc. And I'll move you into room 1. And if what you're imagining is an infinite process by which, like the process of each person kicking out the next person just goes on forever, which would be weird enough, you haven't even wrapped your mind around the full weirdness of this yet. because assuming that the night manager at the Infinite Hotel had an infinite PA system so you could communicate with all the rooms at once, the whole process could be over in 5 minutes, and everybody would be bedded down where they were going to sleep that night. Nobody would need to share a room. Nobody would need to sleep outside. Because if you have, because the properties of infinite collections were really, 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 really weird. And Craig thinks this is a reason to think that you couldn't have an infinite quantity of anything in real life. Therefore, since you can't have actual infinities, therefore the time span of the universe can't be an actual infinity. Therefore, the universe must have begun to exist. Therefore, the universe as a whole must have a cause. An objection you can make to this or any other version of the ontological argument is this big gap between there's a cause and the cause is the single all-powerful God of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But, reasonable objection. If you read David Hume's dialogue concerning natural religion, he has a lot of fun with this. Says, well, why do you think one God? Why not a committee of gods? Why not this? Why not that?
Because the committee could never get anything done. That's why.
Yes, that should have been the answer of the dialogue. Okay. But also, even sidestepping that problem, why? Here's an obvious question to ask yourself about all this. This is, the paper that I wrote for the independent study I did with Quentin about this. This is the point of it there that, okay, hold on. Has God always existed? Because if so, well, no. By this argument, God can't have always existed. That would be an actual infinity. But if not, if God hasn't always existed, then doesn't God need a cause? And aren't we right back to square one with this argument? And then, in fact, if God needs a cause, then not only is that embarrassing if you want to be a monotheist, but the cause of God is going to need a cause. The cause of God is going to need to get a cause. And before you know it, you have an actual infinity of gods, which you're not supposed to be able to have actual infinities. So this seems like something has gone very wrong somewhere in our reasoning here. You could try to argue that God is neither finite, the pre-existence of God is neither finite nor infinite. I mean, good luck with that. But that's probably a little too dismissive, but I think for the stream, that's good enough. I could say God is outside of time. I think that's a slogan, not a theory. But anyway, but if something's gone wrong here, if you accept the objection, something's gone wrong here. What's gone wrong? And my nominee for what's going wrong would be this idea that just because the properties of infinite collection seem super weird to us, that gives us some reason to think that there couldn't be an actual an infinite amount of time in the past or anything like that. I'd say, look, lots of things are confusing to us, right? That's what do you want? The universe is under no obligation to conform to human intuition about how it should work. So let's see. Craig is actually a little inconsistent about this. Sometimes in some writings, he'll say things like, well, God is outside of time. But then when the universe is created, God is in time. And so, well, wait a second, I want to hear more about this then, because that sounds like God is not in time before God is in time. That's, there's some trying to take seriously that sans time thing gets you into some very weird places. But in any case, which, although I will say, for the sake of trying to be fair about this and call balls and strikes, we watched Craig's debate with Christopher Hitchens on the channel a while ago with our friends Mark Warren. I wasn't hesitating because I forgot Mark's last name. I was just trying to remember who was on that stream. Mark Warren and Ryan Lake, and I think that. As much as I am much more on Team Hitchens in that context, Craig definitely won the debate. I think that you do learn some stuff in philosophy grad school, and I don't buy his arguments on most of these things, but I think he did do better in that case. But in any case, So I guess you want to do the ontological argument, then wrap up, or
Oh, you mean that Anselm thing?
yo?
Yeah, you're gonna have. I don't ever remember how. Like, if the thing is the greatest thing you can imagine, then it has to be real because the real version is greater than the imagined version. And
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that is accurate. That is the argument. So Saint Anselm has like the original version of this, and Descartes says something in the meditation that's sort of a version of this. Although it's also kind of a weird combination of it and the cosmological argument is like you have an idea of perfection in your mind and whatever. But the original version, there are a couple different like ways of putting this, and don't at me with your Anselm scholarship that I'm getting this slightly wrong. This is I think a good enough summary for our purposes here of what Saint Anselm was saying. That if so yeah, I think it seems very weird to most people. Like this is the one, like the first two arguments that how can, like the cosmological argument basically comes out of a thought that many people have had outside of philosophy classes, which is why is there something rather than nothing. You have to say there's God to be able to explain why there's something rather than nothing. The teleological argument comes from an idea many people have had outside of philosophy classes, which is, oh, look at how amazing and beautiful and harmonious the world is. There must be a creator. The ontological argument is based on no idea that has ever crossed anyone's mind outside of a philosophy class. And I seriously doubt that it's ever convinced anybody. I don't think there's a person in the world who's like, well, I didn't believe, I was an agnostic, but then I heard the ontological argument. I was like, well, that sounds right. And now, and now I'm a believer. I don't think that's ever happened. Most people, even if they agree with the conclusion, even if they are theists, like have an intuitive reaction to it. Like, wait, what? That can't be right. Because Anselm, unlike the first two arguments, right? So there's the teleological argument, which is there must be a creator because the specific way the world is. The cosmological argument says, well, there must be a creator because any sort of world at all exists. The ontological argument says, well, forget whether there's a world or not. Let's go another level of abstraction deep, and just with like a pencil and a piece of paper, just a sufficiently sharp pencil and no reference to like anything about the empirical world, we can prove the existence of God. And
Silver, my philosophy of religion professor, used the example of the perfect plate of spaghetti.
Yeah. So the way the argument goes, I mean, Jenn ran through the quick version earlier, but is that Anselm says, well, God, let's start by defining God. God is, here's the definition of God. God is that which is more perfect than, it's the most perfect possible being, basically.
The most perfect thing that can be conceived.
Yeah, I think that's the original Anselm's the most perfect thing that can be conceived. I think, I think that gets us into some stuff about like, okay, are we really talking about imagining? Are we in fact conceiving God? I think if you just say the most perfect possible being, maybe that gets us to the heart of the issue. And the same way that nobody can be taller than the world's tallest man, no man could be taller than the world's tallest man, or he would be the world's tallest man, and nobody would be taller than him. Then no man would be taller than him. Maybe the world's tallest woman is. The same way, nothing can be more perfect than the most perfect possible being. So far, so good. Well,
what is more perfect? A perfect being that exists in our imagination, or a perfect being that exists in reality?
Yeah. Hey, existing makes you way more perfect than something that doesn't exist, right? Like if you said, if you were going to buy a car and you said, all right, well, here are the options, or I'll go back to the spaghetti, right? You said like, oh, there are two kinds of spaghetti on the menu. And, they have different, spaghetti, whatever, some Italian word. and you don't know what the Italian words mean, and you say, these two spaghettis here sound very similar. I noticed one of them's like 50 cents cheaper than the other one. What's the difference? It's like, okay, well, it's basically the same. They're both blah, blah, blah. You describe all the properties of the spaghetti. The only difference is that the one that's 50 cents more expensive actually exists. Say, okay, well, I prefer spaghetti that existed in reality.
That is better spaghetti
than spaghetti that only exists in my conception. So therefore, a being that exists, that actually exists, is more perfect than one that doesn't exist. Existence is an advantage, is a perfection in Anselm's terminology. Therefore, since it's a contradiction in terms to say the most perfect possible being, that, it's a contradiction in terms to say that there could be a being more perfect than the most perfect possible being. But if the most perfect possible being doesn't exist, there is a being that's more perfect, one just like that exists. Therefore, the most perfect possible being exists. All right. Now, if anybody has to pause the stream while you rush to your local cathedral to get baptized, because you were swayed by that argument, we'll be here when you get back. So to try to be charitable about this, one way of thinking about the structure of the argument is totally fine. Like, this is the kind of argument that mathematicians use all the time. Like, you ask a mathematician to prove to you that there's no largest even number. They'll say, okay, here's how I'll prove it. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, there is a largest even number. Call it E. E plus 2 would be an even number larger than the largest even number. That's a contradiction. Therefore, our assumption is false. Therefore, there is no largest even number. That is a totally legitimate, what mathematicians call proof by contradiction, or philosophers call reductio ad absurdum, that you make an assumption, you prove that some contradiction or other absurd consequence follows from it, and therefore you reject the assumption. That is a totally legitimate argument form. So, what is wrong with it? Well, you could say that existence isn't a perfection. You could try to fight him on that part. Maybe. By the way, like, the idea is that if God is the most perfect possible being, if that's what God means, then we could derive all the usual properties of God from that. That, a being with limited knowledge would be less perfect than one with unlimited knowledge. A being of limited power would be less perfect than a being of unlimited power. You could ask why perfect benevolence, not perfect malevolence. But I think Anselm, like a lot of medieval philosophers, thought of evil as an imperfection, as like an absence of good. So that's why he wouldn't say that. But what Jenn was saying about the most perfect plate of spaghetti earlier does get us at one of the big objections, which was made by Guanilo, I think is how you say that dude's name. Ganilo. Okay, something like that. The most
perfect island.
Yeah. So even though Ganilo is obviously a theist, he's also a monk. He does not buy this argument whatsoever. He has the reaction that most people do. Something's clearly gone wrong here, guys. So Anselm's original writing is called On the Fool, because there's a line in the Psalms or Proverbs, one of those, about the fool who says in his heart that there is no God. Mm-hmm. And so Guanilo's response is called On Behalf of the Fool. And he basically says, like Jenn just said.
How can you apply this to an island? Clearly not. Just like you cannot apply this to a plate of spaghetti.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much, Lance.
Thank you.
Love you too. Yes, much appreciated. So you say, well, okay, we wouldn't say, hey, the most perfect possible island must be one that actually exists, because, if the most perfect possible island didn't exist, then we could conceive of there was this possible island more perfect than the most perfect possible island, which is one that exists. Therefore, the most perfect, that's contradiction in terms, therefore the most perfect possible island exists. Nobody would think that this is a good reason to think the perfect island actually is out there in the ocean somewhere. And yes, you can do the perfect chocolate chip cookie or whatever.
My mom makes those.
Okay, but you can't prove them a priori. You have to actually know.
I know.
Yeah, but that's you didn't reason from first principles
I
that her cookies existed. You've experienced
many of those.
You've experienced them.
So why don't you come visit so I can experience some more?
Yeah, Freddie, come on. So Cadillo says this doesn't necessarily show us what's wrong with the argument, but it shows us something's wrong with it. And then you say, well, what's wrong with it? The most popular response comes from Kant. It's not the case that he can't figure out what's wrong with it. He can't. Sorry, I can't not. I can't.
You
not.
can't not.
Yeah. It's enough of that, I guess.
Please.
So.
Welcome to my life, y'all.
So Kant says the thing that's wrong with this is the idea that we can compare, like, here's the version of God who exists and there's a version who doesn't exist. They have all the same properties except there's like one item on the checklist that's checked for the existing God that's not checked for the non-existing God, which is the property of existence. And Kant says this is just a totally confused way to think about it. That existence he thinks is not a property. This is not something that's like it's not that there are some objects that have this property of existence and others that don't have this property of existence, that like to existed is just another way of saying that there is an object to talk about at all. There is no point of comparison. It's like the version that doesn't exist.
Yeah, but then we talked about Pegasus. We can talk about Pegasus even though Pegasus doesn't exist. Pegasus does not have the quality of existing, and yet.
Yeah, so is
there the property of existing?
Yeah, so is there a thing? Is there this object Pegasus that has other properties, being a horse with wings, whatever, that but doesn't have the property of existing? Is that what we're referring to? When we talk about Pegasus, and it's a very natural thought to think that we are, right? I mean, clearly, right? If I say, Pegasus does not exist, I'm referring to Pegasus and attributing him the property of not existed. That's definitely the simplest explanation of that bit of language, and the one that does the least violence to our intuitive sense of how these things work. But this is exactly the kind of thing, right? That like it does also seem, if you're thinking about this more abstract way, that there's something really funny about the notion of a non-existent object, like that there's a thing there to talk about that just doesn't have this like quality of existing. That's something an object can have or lack. Like Alvin Plantinga, even though he does have a sort of version of the ontological argument. He doesn't think it can prove that God exists. He thinks it can prove that God either necessarily exists or necessarily doesn't exist. But he says, look, there's one thing we can be sure there aren't any of. It's non-existent objects. And you can kind of feel the intuitive force of that too. So this is the kind of thing that led Russell to say, well, it's not that we're referring to Pegasus and say that he doesn't exist. So Quine, who wrote a famous essay called On What There Is, where he's running with Russell's idea, says, what we're saying when we say Pegasus does not exist is nothing Pegasizes. That, in other words, out of all the things, we're saying, okay, here are all the things, here are all the objects, none of them are a horse with wings.
That is a thing that I made Ben watch, actually, is the 90s Hercules movie.
Oh, that was a good one.
Which is fantastic. One of my favorites.
So, and the answer to what is the relationship between existing and time is this will be covered on a future Philosophy Friday, because that is a big question. And the metaphysics of time, A theory, B theory, all that good stuff is there some sense in which Julius Caesar exists or your future great-great-grandchildren exist? What does that mean? Blah blah blah. We'll get into it. But meanwhile, I think we've gone almost an hour and a half. You want to call it a night?
I'm fine with calling it a night.
All right. I know we haven't completely settled why is there something rather than nothing, and
We haven't?
does God exist, and if so,
Why
how do
don't
you
we
explain
do?
undeserved suffering, and if not, is
No, that's next week.
everything meaningless, and all that stuff. We haven't completely settled these issues, but we'll totally do that next week.
Absolutely.
So,
Do you have things to plug now?
oh, geez, I do. Thank you. So yeah, on Sunday for the Sunday night debate breakdown, I'm going to be watching and commenting on the Zizek Hanen debate with Conrad Hamilton and Matt McManus, who are the co-authors of an article in Jacobin called "In Defense of Slavoj Zizek," which you should check out. Definitely my favorite Slovenian, and not just because the only other one I can think of is Melania Trump.
Isn't Luka Doncic from Slovenia? He's my favorite Slovenian.
Okay, well, Zizek is my favorite.
I agree to disagree on who the best Slovenian is.
All right. Well, will you at least give me a top 5 Slovenian? Zizek is a top 5 Slovenian.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. I love Zizek. He's great. Yeah, friend not. So that is on Sunday, Zizek versus Hanen, Sunday night debate breakdown. On Monday, Victor Buzone, who is the co-host with Matt McManus of Plastic Pills, is...
I don't know if he's that hot.
Yeah, I mean, I got to think Melania, right? If we're just going to call balls and strikes here.
I mean, yeah, but just... yeah. I just not sure
I think Zizek has many virtues. He's probably not the hottest Slovenian.
No, Luka's hotter.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, in any case, so good stuff. Good stuff coming up. Oh, you should also check out. I was interviewed about my new book, Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, a critique of the contemporary left.
I'm sorry, what was that again?
Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, a critique of the contemporary left. So I was interviewed about that book on the Red and Green podcast, Scott and Bob, which was a really good discussion. That just came out today, so you should check that out. So, yeah, sorry, man. So yeah. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. So yeah, casual philosophy. That seems like what we do here. So yeah, the book itself, you should buy from. Well, it's sold everywhere the books are sold, but if since I like to have worker-owned bookstores,
Red Emma's.
That is redemmas.org. And someday, I don't know, I think my initial timeline for book events might have been optimistic, but someday in the not too far future, going to start doing in-person events. And so whenever we do, there will most definitely be one there.
You might even see me there.
That's right. So yeah, good stuff. Yep. Read the book. I should also say, last night I interviewed Rick Perlstein, who I think Forrest was saying the other day is kind of the patron saint of GTA. At least we've referred to him so many times on the show. He's a historian. He wrote Nixon Land and a bunch of other books, most recently Reagan Land. And so that was a really good discussion about not only the most recent book, Reagan Land, but about the sort of total story that he's been telling over the course of the first book, which is Before the Storm, then Nixon Land and The Invisible Bridge, and now Reagan Land, which are big books, and I've listened to them like very slowly over the last few years over the course of like 1 million dog walks. So I'm a big fan. Nando also got me to start reading the Robert Caro LBJ books. Even when I'm done with Reagan Land, I still got that like 3 of those left. But In any case, so the conversation with Rick Perlstein about Reaganland, about the larger story that he's been telling in all of those books, and about how it applies to the present, is going to come out for patrons on Thursday. So if you want to do that, we really appreciate the support. Pays the bills. So patreon.com/Ben Burgess. And with that, I think we really are going to call it a night. Left is best.
Team Snoopy forever.